want to start today with something that feels a little backwards.
Okay.
Usually, when we think about the government doing something really drastic, like targeting someone in another country, we assume there's a law somewhere that explicitly says, yes, you can do this.
Right. A green light, a vote in Congress, a formal declaration, something clear. The Schoolhouse Rock version.
Exactly. But looking at the sources we have today, these internal memos, these white papers, that assumption seems totally wrong when it comes to the targeted killing program.
Yeah, the argument is pretty startling.
It's that there was never a moment where the law said yes.
Instead, there was a quiet, gradual process where the law just stopped saying no.
That is a huge distinction.
It's everything. It's the difference between authorization and accommodation. The law didn't lead. It was stretched to follow the operation.
And that's our deep dive today. We're not getting into the kinetic stuff, the drones, the missiles themselves. We're looking at the invisible architecture.
The legal gymnastics.
The legal shortcut. How do you take a legal system built for, World War II and make it fit a global shadow war without, breaking it?
Or at least stretch it until it looks like it fits. And to get this, you really have to put yourself in the mindset of those government lawyers right after 9/11. The context is it's crucial.
Okay, so let's set the scene. American law traditionally loves clear lines. It's designed for a declared war, uniformed soldiers, a battlefield you can circle on a map, and eventually a surrender. It's neat.
Katie! But the post-9/11 reality was none of that. The enemy didn't wear a uniform.
Right.
The battlefield wasn't a place. It was a network. It was global. And most critically, there was no end in sight. No surrender to negotiate.
So you have a legal framework that demands boundaries, trying to contain a conflict that has none.
And when a law meets a reality it can't process, it either breaks or it bends.
And in this case, the lawyers decided to bend it or stretch it.
They did. Our mission today is to look at the specific words they targeted. They didn't rewrite the Constitution. They just sort of rewrote the dictionary.
So let's start with the first big one. The first word they had to get around.
Imminent.
Imminent. Now, you and I know what that means. If I say a car crash is imminent, it means, look out, it's about to happen.
Seconds away. And in international law, that's exactly what it meant. There's this old standard, the Caroline test.
Right.
It says the necessity for self-defense must be instant, overwhelming, and leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation.
No moment for deliberation. So the bomber is literally on the runway.
The gun is raised, yes. But here's the friction. The intelligence community goes to the lawyers and says that definition is impossible for us.
Why?
Because modern intelligence doesn't give you a ticking clock. It gives you patterns, chatter, probabilities, heat maps.
So you might know someone is dangerous and planning something, but you have no idea if the attack is tomorrow or next year.
Exactly. So if you stick with that old, immediate definition of imminent, you have to wait until the bomb is already on the truck. And the argument was, if we wait for that kind of certainty, we'll always be too late. We will fail.
So they didn't change the desire to strike. They had to change the word that was blocking the strike.
They redefined imminent, and this is the core of it. Inside these DOJ memos, imminent quietly stops meaning immediate.
And it starts meaning what?
Persistent.
Persistent.
Okay.
That's a leap. That just means they haven't stopped being the enemy.
So logic was, because a group like Al-Qaeda is constantly plotting, the threat from its senior leaders is legally imminent 24 hours a day.
So the threat is considered imminent even if the person is, eating dinner or sleeping.
Yes. Because they haven't renounced their intent to attack, the attack is considered to be in a permanent state of imminence.
That just completely flips the idea of self-defense on its head. Self-defense is supposed to be reactive. You block a punch.
This makes it preemptive. It creates this idea of an elongated imminence. And legally, that was the key. It unlocked everything. Once imminent no longer meant right now, you didn't need to wait for a specific plot. The person became the imminent threat.
Okay, so that solves the when problem. But they still had a where problem, a map problem. Many of these targets weren't in active war zones like Afghanistan.
No, they're in places like Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia.
Sovereign countries. And you can't just, fly a drone into another country's airspace and blow something up. That's an act of war.
It's a violation of the UN Charter, Article 2.4. It's very clear. So the lawyers needed a bypass. They couldn't just ignore sovereignty.
No, that would look terrible.
So they had to build a loophole inside the concept of sovereignty itself.
And that's where this unwilling or unable doctrine comes in.
This is a really fascinating bit of legal maneuvering. The argument starts with something everyone agrees on. States are responsible for policing their own territory.
Makes sense. Keep your own house in order.
But then the U.S. added a twist. They said, what if a state is unwilling to stop a terrorist threat? Maybe they secretly sympathize. Or what if they're unable to stop it?
Because the government is too weak to control its whole country.
Precisely, like in the tribal regions of Pakistan. The argument was that in either case, that state temporarily forfeits its right of non-intervention. Its sovereignty gets a footnote.
So if Yemen's government can't get to a target in some remote valley, the U.S. can just say, don't worry, we'll handle it for you.
That's the logic. It turns sovereignty from an absolute shield into a conditional privilege. And it allows the U.S. to say, we aren't at war with Pakistan. We're at war with a group inside Pakistan that their government can't handle.
But doesn't that effectively just erase borders whenever it's convenient?
It creates a floating battlefield. The battlefield follows the target. If the target moves to a country deemed unable, the legal justification to strike moves there too. It was the passport for the drone program.
It really feels like we're building a legal house of cards here. You change imminent so you can strike any time. You used unwilling or unable so you can strike anywhere. But there's still a big question. Why kill? Why not capture?
And that brings us to the next key phrase, capture not feasible.
Which, on the surface, sounds pretty reasonable. The laws of war prefer capture. You get intelligence. You avoid killing if you don't have to. It's supposed to be the last resort.
That's the theory. But feasibility became an incredibly elastic term in these documents. It stopped being a simple binary question of, can we physically grab this person?
It became
A risk assessment. And the crucial question is, risk to whom?
to the target.
To American forces.
Yeah.
That was the shift. The administration argued that if a capture operation, sending in a SEAL team, for instance, posed a significant risk to U.S. personnel, then capture was legally not feasible.
But wait, sending a special ops team into a hostile village is always going to be risky.
Exactly. And that's the catch. If the standard for feasible is low risk, then capture is almost never feasible in these places.
A drone strike carries zero physical risk to a U.S. pilot sitting in Nevada. A raid carries immense risk.
So the math always tilts toward the drone strike. Not feasible became a kind of code for too dangerous or too politically complicated.
It moved killing from the last resort to the first most logical option.
It did. By redefining that one word, they legally cleared a path to use lethal force as the default, not the fallback.
Okay, my head is spinning a little, but I'm following the logic. But all of this so far assumes we're talking about a foreign enemy, a combatant.
No.
But the on of the list, it didn't stop there.
No, and this is where the legal theory faced its biggest stress test. This is the Anwar al-Awlaki case.
The American citizen.
Born in New Mexico, U.S. passport, he was an influential cleric for al-Qaeda in Yemen, a propagandist, certainly a bad actor inciting violence, but he was an American.
And this is where the Constitution slams on the brakes, right? The Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. It's bedrock. You don't execute citizens without a trial.
That's what we all learn. But the DOJ lawyers produced this incredibly dense, very controversial memo.
And what did it argue?
It argued that citizenship isn't a suicide pact, that if a U.S. citizen takes up arms and joins an enemy force, they become an enemy combatant first and a citizen second.
Okay, I get that in a traditional war. An American in a Nazi uniform on the battlefield gets shot at.
Yeah.
But al-Awlaki wasn't on a battlefield holding a rifle.
Right. He was in Yemen, allegedly organizing plots. So who gets to decide he's an enemy combatant worthy of death?
That's the whole question. Normally, a jury decides that.
But the administration's argument was that a judicial process is too slow, too public, so absolutely again, they redefined due process.
Hey, how do you redefine a constitutional right?
They argued that due process does not necessarily have to mean judicial process. They claimed that a careful, rigorous review inside the executive branch could satisfy the constitutional requirement.
Hold on. You're saying the judge and jury were senior officials at the White House and the CIA, the same people who wanted the strike to happen in the first place?
In effect, yes. The memo describes an internal review where high-level officials look at the intelligence, decide the threat is imminent, using that new persistent definition, and determine capture is not feasible. If they all agree, then in their view, due process has been served.
That is chilling. It says the executive branch can be its own prosecutor, judge, and executioner for an American citizen as long as they hold a very serious meeting about it first.
It creates a closed loop. The check on power wasn't an external court. It was an internal checklist.
But without a trial, you never actually prove anything. You're trusting the intelligence.
You're betting the Fifth Amendment on the accuracy of a classified report.
So where was everybody else? Where were the courts? Where was Congress?
The courts were, for the most part, silent. Not because they agreed, but because the administration argued these were military decisions, political questions that judges weren't equipped to second guess. They basically cordoned off the judiciary.
In Congress.
There was oversight, but it was classified. The so-called Gang of Eight key leaders were briefed, but often after the fact and with details held back to protect sources.
Oversight in the dark.
Exactly. And, here's the uncomfortable truth about why this whole system stuck around.
Why?
Because operationally, it worked.
Worked how?
In the cold, hard calculus of counterterrorism, leaders of these groups were killed, their networks were fragmented, and this is the crucial part for the public. There were no massive ground wars and no major follow-up attacks on U.S. soil.
So the lack of a visible cost, like flag-draped coffins, meant there were fewer questions about the legal backflips.
Precisely. Success created silence. And that silence allowed these emergency measures to become permanent. The exception became the rule.
The machine was built, and it ran well, so no one wanted to look too closely at the engine.
And once that machine is built, you can't really unbuild it. More importantly, you can't control who else copies the blueprints.
That's the real Pandora's box, isn't it? We're not the only country with drones and cross-border enemies anymore.
Think about what we've just laid out. We've spent years creating and refining a legal argument that says, if I feel threatened by someone in your country and you can't or won't stop them, I have the right to go in and kill them.
That's an argument that would be very useful for Russia looking at Ukraine, or Turkey looking at the Kurds.
Or any number of other states. International law is all about precedent. By creating this legal shortcut, the U.S. essentially wrote a global playbook. So when another country uses that logic, what's our response?
We can't really say it's illegal. We have the memos that justify it.
We've lost the moral and legal high ground to object. And law, once it's been bent that successfully, it almost never unbends on its own.
It all comes back to that initial distinction you made. It's not about should we, it was about can we.
That's the single biggest takeaway from all these documents. The lawyers were given a technical problem. Find a way to justify this. And being brilliant lawyers, they did. They stretched the words, they connected the dots, they found the path.
But can we justify it? Is a very different question from, should we create a world where this is normal?
Right. And the legal framework essentially provided a shortcut around that much harder, much more important debate. And as our sources put it, once the justification exists, the shortcut becomes the main road.
And we're all driving on it now. A road paved with redefined words. Imminent, that isn't immediate. Feasible. That's really about risk. Due process without a court.
And that road and those powers, they stay on the books. They're ready and waiting for whoever comes next.
Well, this has been heavy. But it's exactly why we do these deep dives, to look past the headline and see the machinery that made it possible.
It's the history of the paperwork. It's just as important.
Thanks for walking us through it. It's incredibly complex, but I think it's crucial to understand.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
That's all for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.